If the topic of suspension is a complete mystery to you, then you absolutely should stay tuned, because in this video, we will clearly explain step by step how you can quickly and easily adjust your vehicle's suspension settings correctly, because it's all about the suspension setup. So stay tuned. And with that, a warm hello, dear bikers, to this new tech tutorial video, where today we'll take a look at how to adjust the suspension systems on an e-bike correctly. We begin this entire process starting with the basic setup, by properly setting the requisite air pressure on both the fork and the shock absorber. And one thing is already perfectly clear. Today we are focusing on spring elements that operate based on an air spring mechanism. So we're not dealing with spring elements that might utilize a steel spring, for instance. In order to adjust the air pressure on the suspension fork accurately, it's essential to first ensure that the air valve is accessible. The air valve is located on the left side of the suspension fork, so when facing the direction of travel, it's on the left stanchion. Sitting on top is a valve cap, which I proceed to carefully unscrew. Much like you find on a bicycle tube, the valve itself is located snugly and comfortably beneath this cap. It indicates that the lid visible up top is not under any pressure, allowing you to unscrew it tranquilly and with confidence. You don't have to worry about it flying off. Just below that spot, you'll locate the air valve. And this is a traditional car valve. In order to properly adjust the air pressure over here, you will need a specialized shock pump like this one. It's strongly suggested that you definitely consider getting one if you haven't already, because you'll find yourself needing it quite frequently. It's essential when you get such a bike that you initially, meaning the very first time, establish a basic setup that works well for yourself. So you make sure to adjust the suspension elements individually to suit your needs. Additionally, it's important that you really take the time to regularly check the air pressure, such as at the end of the riding season or when a new season kicks off, especially if the bike has been lying around unused for several months during the winter months. It's absolutely crucial to check at the season's start to see if the air pressure is still right. In order to verify the air pressure accurately, I'm attaching the shock pump carefully to the valve right at this point, and afterwards I can immediately observe right here, on the display, how much pressure is present in the fork. So, now the important question arises, what level of air pressure is actually necessary for me? For numerous suspension forks, though not absolutely every single one, you can certainly apply the common rule of thumb, your own body weight, in PSI. And when we talk about my weight, it's consistently your ready-to-ride weight, meaning your body weight including helmet, backpack, all your biking gear, plus your bike shoes. So that's the ready-to-ride weight, and you can approximately convert this weight into PSI by using some rough estimations. The PSI is displayed on your shock pump, providing guidance to accurately inflate your bike to the precise pressure needed for optimal performance and ensuring a great riding experience tailored to your individual needs. If you want to get it exactly right, and you definitely should, my clear recommendation is to be accurate and precise when adjusting the suspension elements on your setup. You can also choose to follow the manufacturer's recommended guidelines if you'd like. Most suspension manufacturers typically provide their settings advice on a detailed chart. For your convenience, the tables are typically printed or affixed with a sticker on the rear side of the suspension forks where you can easily refer to them. And in that section, you can find, according to your body weight in the comprehensive table, how much air pressure in PSI recommended by the respective fork manufacturer for the model. All right, so you just go ahead and pump it up, and in order to check if you've got the correct air pressure inside, you'll need to measure what's commonly referred to as the sag. Sag is a term used in English to describe what's known as negative travel, which refers to how many millimeters the fork moves or compresses when I get onto and sit down on the bike. And it's very important that the fork properly compresses, because only when the fork travels down by a specific amount, let's say approximately 20 to 30% of the total available travel, will you be able to achieve a highly active and responsive suspension system. For that, I position myself against a wall and lean my elbow comfortably against it, then sit on the bike. When I'm adjusting the suspension fork, I consistently stand on the bike in a neutral and balanced riding position, known as the active position, perfectly centered over the wheel, which means the belly button should ideally be positioned approximately a little Be ahead of the saddle tip in the middle of the bike, so between the front and rear axles. This generally results in what's known as a neutral stance. Afterward, I bend both my elbows and knees, sinking a bit lower as if you were navigating a downhill path through rough terrain on your bike. This is known as the active neutral position. And in this stance, you've now placed weight on the bike, and as a result, the suspension components begin to compress. This leads to the fork compressing, and then there's what is frequently referred to as the ZAC indicator. This is the scraper ring. Sometimes it's red, sometimes it's blue, sometimes it's black. That's the specific ring that essentially sits on the stanchions here. And this particular ring, you go ahead and press it carefully here, sliding it completely all the way down now so that it rests directly and securely on top of the ceiling of the fork casting. And when you ensure that the ring is securely sitting flush there, you can then proceed to very carefully, without causing any bouncing, dismount from the bike. Simply pull out the fork entirely just one time, and then you can accurately use the caliper tool. By utilizing a ruler, a yardstick, or a measuring tape, you will be able to accurately measure the exact number of millimeters by which the fork is being compressed while it is in its neutral resting position. And as previously mentioned, it's very important that the fork compresses by at least 20% of its overall capacity. For individuals who engage in sporty and active cycling and desire to receive very distinct feedback from the terrain, it is highly recommended to opt for 20mm sags. For individuals seeking a higher level of comfort and wishing for a noticeably softer ride quality, it is recommended to have 30% negative travel. That translates to, I'd ideally be targeting roughly 20% negative travel. When dealing with a fork that offers a travel of 140 millimeters, it essentially means that 20% of 140 millimeters equals about 28 millimeters. The fork is meant to ideally compress by around 28 millimeters when it is in its neutral or resting position. You can achieve this measurement quite easily by placing a tape measure right at the seal located at the bottom section, and then measuring all the way up to the wiper ring. If your measurement shows 28 millimeters, then you've hit the correct setting. Then I have got exactly 20% sag. So that's considered optimal. That's exactly the method you use on the rear suspension with the shock absorber. Here, it's just that the conversion factor is different because the suspension travel your bike has is not the same as the travel the shock absorber has. The damper works through a linkage system originating from the rear suspension, which cleverly multiplies its stroke by utilizing the leverage ratio. By carefully applying the linkage ratio, it converts rear movement into increased damper travel, significantly enhancing the overall effectiveness of the suspension system. This means the shock absorber, such as this one right here, has a travel distance of 50 millimeters, which means the shock itself is capable of compressing 50 millimeters. But given that we have a leverage here, the rear end effectively has an extended travel of even 130 millimeters because the entire mechanism is translated through the rocker arms, creating an effective difference. This point is particularly important to understand because when I'm measuring the so-called negative travel at the rear, my reference point is the 50 millimeters of the shock stroke, rather than the 130 millimeters of the overall travel. With a damper from RockShox, one of the leading suspension manufacturers, things become simpler indeed. That's because RockShox employs a very practical and effective approach in this regard, because they thoughtfully print a scale on the damper shaft, making it extremely easy for me to read, eliminating the need to measure it myself or carry out any calculations. The scale then tells me directly where my scraper ring is positioned, and then I can clearly see here in increments of 20, 25, 30, and even up to 40% exactly where it is. My sag is set, and how much negative travel I have. If I don't have a RockShox gauge handy, then I have to go back to the more traditional method, like on the fork, meaning I need to do a manual measurement, and for that, I get on the bike again. And in this particular case, I highly recommend extending the saddle to match your usual riding position, then sit properly on the bike. It's crucial not to keep the brakes pressed. So make sure to have open brakes. Lean back against the wall with your elbow once more. Give a gentle rebound to activate the suspension system properly, then settle into position and reach down to pull the dust wiper ring upward. make sure to do it exactly like this, so that it sits perfectly flush here against the damper housing. And now comes the crucial turning and focal point of the whole procedure. Now you have to dismount from the bike in such a way that it doesn't bounce back. That's precisely why it's always beneficial to have a second person nearby to assist you with this. You can simply reach under the saddle or grab the top tube and lift the whole thing up. If you don't have that, it's recommended to do it somewhere at the edge of a table or on a windowsill where you can support yourself with one hand upwards, so that whenever you swing your leg off the bicycle, you won't inadvertently bounce again with your own body weight. Exactly. Once you've completed that, then go ahead and use the measuring tool again to ascertain precisely by how many millimeters the damper has compressed itself while in the neutral position. And if, for example, you have set the front 20%. Negative travel, then I recommend at the rear a bit more suspension travel, a bit more negative travel, meaning you should adjust the shock absorber to be a tad softer than the fork. So if you had 120% sag in the front, then it should be around 25% in the back, or maybe even up to 30% travel. And with that, you've basically set up your suspension regarding the air pressure. This covers the basic setup of the suspension elements in terms of spring hardness. Next, let's proceed to the compression and rebound settings. So to the damping unit, because all spring elements are based on both a spring, in this case an air spring, and on damping. The damping is always on the right side of the suspension fork, the air spring located on the left. And the damping unit on the right side is divided into two specific elements, namely the compression damping, which is responsible for regulating the speed at which the fork compresses, and the rebound damping, which regulates the rebound speed. Now, as we're dealing with speed here, you might recall the symbols on the RockShox suspension components. Instead of hedgehog, it's actually a tortoise and a hare. The hare represents a fast setting, while the tortoise stands for a slow one. This is meant to symbolize that when you adjust towards the hare, the fork or suspension system operates more rapidly. In contrast, if you adjust towards the tortoise, it functions more slowly, providing a gentler response. Slower, and the principle is as fast as possible, as slow as necessary, and that's precisely what we're going to adjust now. Blue always represents the compression level, while red signifies the rebound level, and we always start with the rebound level since that is the most crucial aspect. We first fully open the compression level and then adjust the rebound level from the closed position incrementally, click by carefully opening it, click by click, from its completely closed state, ensuring a precise setup, until the fork genuinely rebounds swiftly without suddenly popping out. It definitely shouldn't bounce upwards like a pogo stick, which would, due to excessive rebound speed, cause the wheel to uncontrollably hop around on the ground. But it should rebound quickly and efficiently while remaining stable and grounded at the same time, without the wheel ever actually losing contact with the ground during the rebound process. However, it should not be too slow either, because in that case, the rebound speed becomes too sluggish, and the fork, when encountering rapid sequences of bumps, lacks the capability to rebound quickly in order to restore as much suspension travel as possible promptly. So, once again, damping should always be as fast as the conditions allow, yet as slow as necessary to maintain control. That wraps up our section on setting the suspension components, like air pressure. And remember, if any further questions arise, please don't hesitate to ask. Feel free to share your questions in the comments section below. We're more than happy to explore the topic further with you, and are genuinely curious to know if this video has been helpful and informative for you. We look forward to your feedback. See you next time, Maxi from Rebike. If e-bike, then rebike.